The summons came without reason and without mercy, delivered by Marta's trembling hand just as Damien Price finished scrubbing the blood from the kitchen floor. That blood had belonged to a man whose name Damien never learned, a man who had lasted 3 days in the basement before Valentina Corsino grew bored of his screams. The floor was white marble. The blood had pooled in the grout like dark vines. Damien had spent 4 hours on his knees with a brush and a bucket, and still the stain remained. Marta found him there, her apron wrinkled from the morning's work, her mouth pressed into a thin line of worry. She did not explain the summons. She did not need to. In the Corsino mansion, a midnight call to the master's study meant one of two things, a promotion or a grave. Marta's hand shook as she handed him a clean shirt. Damien took it without a word. He had learned long ago that words were debts he could not afford. The mansion had been his prison for 6 months. His father, a man of weak blood and weaker character, had stolen nearly $2 million from the Corsino syndicate, believing a single winning bet would erase his debts. The winning bet never came. The bullet did. Damien inherited the ledger, the interest, and the obligation. He worked from dawn past midnight, scrubbing, carrying, serving, enduring the sideways glances of guards who saw him as less than furniture. He slept in a closet converted to a bedroom, 3 feet wide, with a thin mattress and no window. He did not complain. Complaint was a luxury for people with choices. Now, walking the long corridor toward Valentina Corsino's private study, Damien felt the familiar weight of dread settle behind his ribs. The corridor was lined with portraits of dead men, each one a former Corsino don, each one killed by ambition or betrayal. Valentina had hung them here deliberately, a gallery of warnings for anyone who forgot the cost of power. Damien passed them slowly. He noticed how the men in the paintings all had the same eyes as her, dark, flat, unblinking. A family curse, Marta had once whispered. The Corsino stare. He knocked once. The door opened without a sound. Valentina Corsino stood with her back to him, facing the empty fireplace. She wore black from throat to wrist to floor, the kind of black that absorbed light and returned nothing. Her hair was pulled back so tightly that her temples appeared stretched, polished like bone. She did not turn when he entered. She let him stand in the doorway, let the silence grow heavy and sour, let him feel the full weight of being unseen by someone who could end his life with a single nod. Damien waited. He had learned to wait. Waiting was the first lesson of servitude. Your time was never your own, and your patience was a currency they spent without mercy. She spoke without turning. Her voice was low, flat, stripped of anything that might resemble warmth. She asked if he knew why she had called him. He said he did not. She turned then, slowly, and he saw for the first time the bruise blooming across her left cheekbone, a dark purple crescent that curved toward her jaw like a second mouth. She had been attacked. Not today, not yesterday. The bruise was old enough to yellow at the edges, fresh enough to still look painful. She had not hidden it with cosmetics. She wanted him to see it. She crossed the room in 3 steps. Up close, she was shorter than he expected, but her presence collapsed the space between them until he felt the air grow thin. She studied his hands. He kept them still, palms open, fingers relaxed. A trick from his medical training: never show tension in the hands. Tension invited violence. She spoke again, quieter this time, as if confessing a secret she did not want the walls to hear. She said her most trusted guard had tried to kill her 3 nights ago. The guard had been with the family for 12 years. He had eaten at her table. He had held her hair back when she was sick from a fever. And then he had put a knife to her throat while she slept, and he had whispered the name of her enemy before he struck. She stopped speaking. The silence that followed was not empty. It was packed tight with rage, with betrayal, with the particular loneliness of a woman who had learned that loyalty was a lie people told to buy time. Damien did not offer sympathy. Sympathy would have been an insult. Instead, he asked what she needed. The question came out steady, neutral, the same tone he had used with trauma patients in the emergency room before his father's death stole his license and his future. She looked at him then. Really looked. Her gaze traveled from his worn shoes to the calluses on his knuckles to the faded scar above his left eyebrow, a scar he had gotten defending a patient from an angry husband. She saw everything. That was her gift, Marta had said. Valentina Corsino saw the cracks in people before they knew the cracks existed. She told him she was promoting him. Not to guard, not to soldier, but to personal attendant. He would dress her. He would serve her meals. He would sleep outside her bedroom door on a mat, and he would listen to her breathe through the night, and he would wake if the breathing changed. She was not asking. She was informing. Damien felt the floor tilt beneath him. Personal attendant to the head of the Corsino family was not a job. It was a leash. It meant he would be the first target of anyone who wanted to hurt her. It meant he would witness her secrets, her weaknesses, her moments of unguarded cruelty. And once a servant saw those things, there was only one way out of the mansion. He refused. The word left his mouth before he could catch it, a small rebellion that tasted like ash. He reminded her of the debt. He reminded her that he was already working 18 hours a day, that his body ached from the labor, that he had not asked to be born to a thief. He said he would rather scrub the blood from her floors for 10 more years than sleep outside her door like a dog. She moved faster than he expected. One moment she was across the room. The next, her fingers were wrapped around his jaw, her thumb pressed into the soft hollow beneath his ear, forcing his face down to meet her eyes. Her grip was precise, clinical. She knew exactly where to apply pressure to make a man freeze without cutting off his air. She whispered that he did not have the luxury of refusal. His father's debt was not paid in labor. It was paid in obedience. Every hour of his life belonged to her until she decided otherwise. She could sell that debt to any number of men who would work him to death within a year. She could throw him into the street with nothing but the clothes on his back, and the rival families who hated her would assume he knew her secrets, and they would tear him apart piece by piece to learn them. She released his jaw. The absence of her touch felt worse than the pressure had. She stepped back and tilted her head, studying him again. Then she said something that lodged itself beneath his ribs like a splinter. She said he had steady hands. She had noticed him in the hallway 6 weeks ago, when one of her wounded guards collapsed from a dislocated shoulder. The other servants had screamed or frozen. Damien had knelt beside the man, talked him through the pain, and reset the joint in a single fluid motion. No hesitation. No fear. Just the quiet competence of someone who had been trained to save lives in a world that only wanted to take them. She said she needed steady hands. Not for violence. For survival. Damien understood then that she was not asking him to be a servant. She was asking him to be a witness. She was alone in a house full of wolves, and she had chosen him, a disgraced medic, a debt slave, a man with nothing left to lose, because he had once helped a stranger without being asked. He looked at the bruise on her cheekbone. He looked at her hands, knuckles bruised from fighting off her attacker. He looked at the empty fireplace behind her, and he imagined all the fires she had walked through alone. He agreed. Not because he wanted to. Because refusing her would have been the same as choosing death, and Damien Price had not survived 6 months of servitude only to die for pride. She nodded once, a small motion that might have been satisfaction or might have been exhaustion. She turned back to the fireplace. The conversation was over. He was dismissed. Damien walked to the door, then stopped. He did not turn around. He spoke to the space between them, quiet enough that she could pretend not to hear. He said that whoever had tried to kill her would try again. He said that trusting no one was the same as trusting everyone. And then he left before she could respond, because he had seen the flicker of something human in her eyes, and he knew that if he looked at it too long, he would stop being afraid of her. And that, he understood, was the most dangerous thing of all. A month passed. Damien Price learned the geography of Valentina Corsino's body before he learned the geography of her heart. He slept on a thin mat outside her bedroom door, wakeful at every shift of her breathing through the oak. He dressed her each morning in silence, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he fastened necklaces, her spine rigid as iron beneath his knuckles. He tasted her wine before she drank, standing at her elbow during dinners where enemies smiled and allies clutched their forks too tightly. He read her correspondence aloud, his voice flat and uninflected, while she sharpened knives at her desk. The mansion became a cage within a cage. The guards watched him differently now. Not with contempt, but with calculation. A servant who stood behind the Don during syndicate meetings was no longer furniture. He was a message. Valentina wanted her enemies to wonder if the quiet man with the steady hands was a lover, a spy, or a weapon waiting to be aimed. Rocco Vitali, her underboss, was the first to voice the question. He cornered Damien in the pantry one afternoon, close enough that Damien could smell the whiskey on his breath and the gun oil on his coat. Rocco spoke softly, the way men spoke when they wanted you to know they were already imagining your death. He said a servant who forgot his place became a corpse who remembered it too late. He said Valentina's favor was a fever. It burned hot, then killed. Damien said nothing. He had learned that silence was the only shield a servant could carry. That night, Valentina dismissed her usual guards and ordered Damien to follow her to the West Wing, a part of the mansion he had never entered. The corridor was narrower here, the portraits older, the air thick with dust and disuse. She stopped outside a locked door, produced a key from her sleeve, and opened it without explanation. Inside was a room that looked like a museum of violence. Knives mounted on velvet. Photographs of dead men pinned to corkboard. A single chair in the center of the floor, the leather cracked and stained. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of the room and removed her jacket, and Damien saw the blood before he saw the wound. A gash ran from her ribs to her hip, shallow but long, the kind of cut a blade made when the wielder was interrupted mid-swing. She had bandaged it herself, poorly. The gauze was soaked through, and the skin around the edges had begun to bloom a sick yellow-green. Infection was already setting its teeth into her flesh. She had not told anyone. Not Rocco. Not her guards. Not the doctor who visited the mansion twice a week. She had hidden the wound beneath black clothing and controlled breathing, because the moment her enemies learned she was bleeding, they would circle like sharks in chum. Damien crossed the room without permission. He knelt in front of her, his medical training surfacing like a reflex, and examined the wound with his eyes and his fingers. He told her she needed stitches and antibiotics. He told her the infection would reach her bloodstream within 48 hours if she did nothing. He told her she was being a fool. She did not strike him. She looked down at his hands on her skin, and for a single breath, her face lost its mask of iron. She looked tired. She looked young. She looked like a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched without cruelty. She handed him a sewing kit from the drawer of a nearby table. Surgical thread. Curved needle. She had prepared for this moment, he realized. She had brought him to this hidden room because she trusted no one else to see her weak. He stitched the wound in silence. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had once dreamed of saving lives instead of serving a don. She did not flinch. She did not make a sound. But her fingers curled into fists at her sides, and her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of his work, and when he tied the final knot and sat back on his heels, she reached down and pulled him to his feet by his collar. She told him that if he ever betrayed her, she would not kill him. She would make him watch her destroy everyone he pretended not to care about. Marta, the cook, the stable boy who brought him bread at midnight. She would burn them all to ash while he begged, and then she would stitch his eyes open so he could never stop seeing it. Damien believed her. He also believed that her hand on his collar was trembling. He did not mention the tracking chip. He had found it 2 nights ago, while brushing the hair from her neck before bed. A small lump beneath her skin near the collarbone, hard and round and placed with surgical precision. Someone inside her organization had planted it. Someone who wanted to know her location at all times. Someone who had access to her while she slept. He had not told her because he was not yet sure if she had planted it herself as a test. In Valentina Corsino's world, paranoia was not a sickness. It was a survival strategy. So he held the secret behind his teeth, finished the stitches, and followed her back to the main house. He slept on the mat outside her door that night with one eye open, listening to her breathe, wondering if the person who had cut her was the same person who had marked her with the chip. He fell asleep counting her breaths. 43 before he lost count. In the morning, she ordered him to taste her coffee. He did. It was bitter, and she watched him drink it without smiling, and neither of them spoke of the wound or the stitches or the way her hand had trembled against his collar. That was the cage, Damien realized. Not the walls. Not the debt. The silence between the things they could not say. The attack came at 2:47 in the morning, and Damien Price was awake to hear the first shot. He had been sleeping on his mat outside Valentina's door, as he had done every night for 6 weeks. The sound was not loud. A single pop, distant, like a branch breaking in the garden. But Damien had spent enough months in the Corsino mansion to know that branches did not break at that hour, and gardens did not echo. He was on his feet before the second shot. He opened Valentina's door without knocking and found her already standing, already armed, already dressed in black from throat to ankle. She did not ask what was happening. She knew. She had been waiting for this night since the day her trusted guard had put a knife to her throat. Rocco Vitali had sold her. That was the shape the betrayal took. Not a confession, not a warning. The sound of men crossing the lawn with rifles, the smell of gasoline from the East Wing, the sudden absence of the guards who should have been at their posts. Rocco had emptied the mansion's defenses and filled the void with wolves. Valentina grabbed Damien's wrist and pulled him toward the hidden staircase behind her wardrobe. He followed without argument. There was no time for argument. There was only the rapid calculation of escape, the cold mathematics of survival. They descended into darkness. The staircase ended in a tunnel, the tunnel ended in a cellar, and the cellar had no second exit. Damien realized this as Valentina locked the steel door behind them and slid to the floor with her back against the damp stone. She had not led him to safety. She had led him to a tomb. She explained in a flat voice that the cellar was built by her father to withstand a siege. 2 feet of reinforced concrete. No windows. A single air vent no larger than a man's fist. It had saved her life once before, when she was 7 years old and her mother had tried to burn the house down around her. Now it would save her again, or it would become her coffin. The explosion came 30 minutes later. The ground shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Damien felt the pressure wave in his chest, a hammer blow that left his ears ringing and his teeth aching. He looked at Valentina. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. But her eyes were the eyes of someone who had just heard the last door close. They sat in the dark for hours. She told him about her mother, a woman who had sold her to the mafia for a pearl necklace and a promise of protection. She told him about her first kill at 14, a man who had looked at her with the same hunger her mother's buyers always wore. She told him that she had stopped dreaming of a different life so long ago that she could no longer remember what the dream had felt like. Damien told her about his father's gambling, his mother's departure, his lost medical license. He told her that he had once wanted to heal people, and now he simply wanted to outlive them. She laughed at that, a dry sound without humor, and said they were both ghosts of who they had wanted to become. She kissed him first. He did not know if it was gratitude or grief or the simple animal need to feel something other than fear. Her mouth was rough, unpracticed, more punishment than tenderness. She kissed like she was trying to prove something to herself, and whatever it was, she was losing. Damien kissed her back differently. Slowly. Deliberately. He cupped her jaw the way she had once cupped his, but his thumb traced her cheekbone instead of pressing into her throat. He felt her go still. He felt the tension drain from her shoulders, then return twice as strong, then drain again. She pulled away first. Her breath was uneven. Her lips were parted. She looked at him like he had just done something unforgivable. Then they heard the footsteps above. Rocco's voice drifted through the air vent, casual and unhurried. He was speaking to someone on a radio, giving directions, confirming that the safe house was secured and the Don was presumed dead. He laughed at something the other person said. Then his boots stopped directly above the cellar door. Damien heard the click of a lock being tested. Rocco was not trying to open it. He was making sure it was closed. He was making sure they could not get out. Valentina pressed her forehead to Damien's shoulder. Her body was warm. Her hands were cold. She whispered that her underboss had just buried them alive. Damien did not answer. He was already running his fingers over the air vent, measuring its width, calculating the distance to the surface. He had no weapon. He had no plan. But he had spent 6 months scrubbing blood from white marble, and he had learned something important. A servant who survived a Don's favor knew how to crawl through places no one else would go. He turned to Valentina and told her they were not dead yet. He told her to follow him and to stay quiet and to trust him for the next 10 minutes, no matter what she heard or felt or feared. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and Damien Price began to take apart the air vent with his bare hands. The drainage tunnel was not made for human passage. Damien crawled first, scraping his shoulders raw against the curved concrete, tasting rust and standing water with every breath. Valentina followed without complaint, her fingers hooked into the hem of his shirt so she would not lose him in the dark. They moved for what felt like hours. In truth, it was 47 minutes before Damien's outstretched hand found open air. They emerged behind the mansion's old greenhouse, a structure abandoned since Valentina's father died. Moonlight showed him the state of her, a split lip he had not noticed in the cellar, a gash across her forearm from the tunnel's broken rebar, and a quiet fury behind her eyes that burned hotter than any fire Rocco had set. She did not rest. She walked to the greenhouse, kicked open the rotted door, and retrieved a hidden cache of weapons from beneath a loose floorboard. 2 pistols, a knife, a roll of medical tape. She handed Damien the knife and kept the guns for herself. She told him he would not need to shoot anyone. He would only need to follow her and stay alive. They entered the mansion through the kitchen. The guards Rocco had left behind were young, arrogant, and poorly trained. Valentina killed the first one before he could raise his rifle. She killed the second one while he was still reaching for his radio. She moved through the halls like a woman who had memorized every shadow, every blind corner, every place where a man might hide and die. Damien followed. He did not kill anyone. But he held the knife steady, and when a third guard stumbled out of the pantry and lunged for Valentina's back, Damien stepped between them and drove the blade into the man's shoulder, not deep enough to kill but deep enough to stop. The guard fell. Valentina finished him without looking. They found Rocco in the study, the same study where Damien had received his first summons months ago. Rocco was pouring himself a drink, his back to the door, his posture relaxed. He thought she was dead. He thought the mansion was his. He was already celebrating. Valentina closed the door behind her. The sound made Rocco turn. His face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and finally a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. He set down the glass and spread his empty hands, as if to show he meant no harm. He began to speak, some lie about loyalty, some excuse about necessity. Valentina did not let him finish. She crossed the room in 4 strides, took the knife from Damien's hand, and pressed the flat of the blade against Rocco's throat. She asked him if he had anything to say before she opened him from ear to ear. He said nothing. His smile had finally died. She killed him quickly. A single stroke, precise and economical, the same way she did everything. Blood painted the front of her black shirt. She stood over the body for a long moment, breathing evenly, and then she turned to Damien with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She looked unmoored. Not weak. Not frightened. But untethered, as if the act of killing her underboss had cut a rope that had been holding her to something human. She asked him if he had known about the tracking chip. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She had found it while changing her bandages, she said, a small lump near her collarbone that she had never noticed until Damien's stitches made her examine her own skin more closely. She had removed it with her own knife an hour before the attack. She had been waiting to see who would come looking for her. Damien did not lie. He told her he had found it weeks ago. He told her he had not mentioned it because he was not sure if she had planted it herself. He told her he had wanted to see what she would do without it, whether she would become more paranoid or less, whether she would trust her own instincts or crumble under the freedom. She did not raise her voice. She did not strike him. She simply looked at him with those dark, flat Corsino eyes, and for the first time since he had entered her service, Damien could not read what she was thinking. She said he had gambled with her life. She said he had no right to make that choice. She said he was a servant who had forgotten his place, and in any other house, in any other moment, she would have killed him where he stood. But she did not kill him. She cleaned the knife on Rocco's coat, handed it back to Damien, and walked out of the study without another word. The blood on her shirt was already drying to a dark brown. The mansion was quiet. The night was not over, but the worst of it was done. Damien stood alone in the study with the body and the silence and the terrible knowledge that he had just survived something he should not have survived. Valentina Corsino had spared him not because she was merciful, but because she needed him. And that need, he understood, was more dangerous than her cruelty had ever been. She did not forgive him. Valentina Corsino was not built for forgiveness. But she did something worse than forgive Damien Price. She promoted him. The morning after Rocco's death, she called the remaining captains to the study. Rocco's blood had been cleaned from the floor, but the stain remained in the grout, a dark reminder of what happened to men who reached above their station. Valentina stood before her people with Damien at her right hand, not as a servant, not as a pet, but as her second. She gave no explanation. She demanded no approval. She simply announced that anyone who questioned her choice would join Rocco in the family crypt. No one questioned. Damien spent the next 6 weeks learning the machinery of the syndicate. He reviewed ledgers, studied rival territories, and sat through executions without flinching. Valentina watched him the entire time, waiting for him to break, to betray, to reveal himself as another Rocco in waiting. He did none of those things. He simply worked, and healed, and slept on a real bed now, though he still left his door open so he could hear her pacing in the night. The change came on a Tuesday. She found him in the library at midnight, reading an old surgical textbook he had stolen from the greenhouse cache. She sat across from him without speaking for a long while. Then she told him she was tired. Not of him. Of the guns, the blood, the constant arithmetic of enemies and allies. She asked if he thought she could walk away. He said he thought she could do anything except stay still. She kissed him then. Different from the cellar. Slower. Softer. The kiss of a woman who had decided to stop fighting the only war she could not win. 3 weeks later, the mansion burned. Valentina set the fire herself. Her captains believed she died in the flames. Her enemies celebrated. Her allies mourned. And in a small town 500 miles away, a quiet man named Damian Price opened a free clinic in a converted storefront, and his wife, a woman with dark hair and steady hands and a bruise on her cheekbone that had long since healed, swept the floors and counted the bandages and never once looked over her shoulder. She did not miss the throne. She had traded it for a chain of her own choosing, and the chain had Damian's name etched into every link. They lived. That was the ending. Not happily, not simply, but together in the way that survivors are together, wary, watchful, grateful for the small mercies of a quiet morning. She still woke before dawn. He still checked the locks twice. But when she reached for him in the dark, his hand was always there, steady as it had been on the first night she summoned him to her study. The most ruthless mafia boss did not die in a fire. She learned to kneel, not to power, not to fear, but to the impossible weight of wanting someone who had seen her monster and stayed. If you want more dark romance stories like Dead of Flesh, subscribe now. Every week, new chapters delivered straight to you, no cliffhangers left unresolved, no hearts left unbroken without repair.